Hi, I'm Captain Sarah Mitchell. They called me the family disgrace, told me I wasn't feminine enough, disciplined enough, worthy enough of the Mitchell name. Then they banned me from my own grandmother's funeral like I was some kind of stranger. 8 years later, I stood at that same cemetery in my dress blues, and 8 Navy SEALs snapped to attention and saluted. "Colonel, ma'am." You ever wonder what happens when the one they cast aside becomes the warrior they never saw coming? Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Before we dive deep into this story, what time are you watching this and where are you tuning in from? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one, and I want to know who's out there listening to this journey. I was always the one who marched to a different drum beat, literally and figuratively. While my sister Vanessa practiced piano scales and learned proper table manners, I was in the backyard doing push-ups and studying military history. My name is Sarah Elena Mitchell, middle child in a family that valued tradition above all else. From the moment I could walk, I was fascinated by stories of courage, strategy, and service. While other girls my age were playing with dolls, I was building obstacle courses and timing myself on how fast I could complete them. My parents called it a troubling phase. My older brother Marcus called me G.I. Jane in that mocking way siblings do. My younger sister Vanessa just rolled her eyes whenever I talked about wanting to serve my country. Everyone assumed I'd grow out of it, especially when I hit high school and was supposed to focus on finding a nice college, maybe studying something respectable like education or business administration. The Mitchell family had expectations, you see. We lived in Riverside Heights, Virginia, in a colonial house that had been in the family for 3 generations. My father, Robert Mitchell, was a successful insurance executive who wore the same Navy suit every Monday and believed that success meant stability, predictability, and staying within your lane. My mother, Patricia, was the perfect complement to his vision. She organized charity galas, hosted book clubs, and made sure we all knew exactly what was expected of Mitchell children. Marcus was following the prescribed path beautifully. He was studying business at University of Virginia, already lined up for an internship at Dad's firm, dating a girl from the right family. Vanessa was the artistic one, studying music composition, which the family tolerated because it was refined and feminine. Then there was me, talking about military academies and physical fitness standards like some kind of alien who'd landed in their perfectly manicured world. I remember the exact moment I knew I wanted to be a soldier. I was 14, and we were visiting my grandmother Elena, my mom's mother, who lived about an hour outside Richmond. Grandma Elena was different from the rest of them. She had stories that made your spine tingle, about her father who served in World War II, about her brother who died in Korea. She kept a small American flag on her kitchen windowsill and knew the words to every military song ever written. That day, she pulled out an old photo album I'd never seen before. The pictures were black and white, some faded to sepia, showing men and women in uniform from different eras. She pointed to one photo, a young woman with fierce eyes standing next to a military transport truck. "That's your great-great-aunt Catherine," she said, her voice filled with pride. She drove supply trucks in World War II. Wasn't supposed to be anywhere near combat, but she saved 12 soldiers when their convoy got hit by enemy fire. Never got a medal for it because women weren't supposed to be heroes back then. I stared at that photo for what felt like hours. Catherine looked strong, determined, unafraid. She looked like someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was meant to do. That night, I told Grandma Elena I wanted to be like Catherine. I wanted to serve, to protect people, to be part of something bigger than myself. Grandma Elena smiled, but it was a sad smile. "That's a beautiful dream, sweetheart," she said, "but your parents have different plans for you. Sometimes we have to choose between what our hearts want and what our families expect." I was young then, and still believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I proved myself clearly enough, my family would eventually understand. So I threw myself into preparation. I joined the JROTC program at school, despite my parents' obvious disapproval. I started running 5 miles every morning before school, doing calisthenics in my room at night. I studied military history with the same intensity as other kids devoted to video games. My grades were excellent, my physical fitness scores were off the charts, and my JROTC instructors consistently ranked me at the top of our unit. Colonel Davies, our senior instructor, pulled me aside one day during my junior year. "Mitchell," he said, "you've got what it takes for the Naval Academy. Your test scores, your leadership potential, your physical capabilities, you're exactly what they're looking for." That was the first time someone in authority had looked at me and seen potential instead of a problem to be solved. Colonel Davies helped me understand the application process, the congressional nomination requirements, and the physical fitness standards. For the first time in my life, I had a roadmap to becoming exactly who I wanted to be. But when I brought the academy application materials home, the temperature in our house dropped about 20 degrees. My father looked at the papers like I'd handed him evidence of some terrible crime. My mother's face went pale, and she immediately started talking about how I needed to think practically about my future. "Sarah, honey," Mom said, her voice tight with controlled panic, "the military isn't a place for young women like you. You come from a good family. You have opportunities that other people would kill for. Why would you want to throw that away to play soldier?" Dad was more direct. "This is ridiculous, Sarah. You're 17 years old. You don't know what you want. This is just rebellion, acting out because you think it makes you special or different. Well, guess what? Different isn't always better." Marcus chimed in with his usual sensitivity. "Come on, Sarah, be realistic. You're like 5'6" and maybe 130 pounds soaking wet. What are you going to do, intimidate the enemy with your book reports?" Even Vanessa, who usually stayed out of family conflicts, felt compelled to offer her opinion. "I just think there are better ways to serve people, you know? Like teaching or nursing. Something more appropriate." The word appropriate hung in the air like a judgment. Appropriate for who? For a Mitchell? For a woman? For someone who was supposed to know her place and stay in it? I tried to explain. I talked about leadership, about serving something greater than myself, about the honor and tradition of military service. I showed them my fitness scores, my academic achievements, the recommendation letters from teachers and JROTC instructors. I thought facts and evidence would convince them. Instead, Dad scheduled a meeting with our family therapist, Dr. Williamson, to discuss my, quote, aggressive tendencies and, quote, difficulty accepting feminine roles. Mom started leaving college brochures for teaching programs on my bed. Marcus made jokes about me joining the circus instead, since I apparently liked performing stunts so much. But the worst was the silent treatment. They stopped asking about my day, stopped including me in family planning conversations, stopped acknowledging my achievements entirely. When I made the honor roll, no one congratulated me. When I was promoted to battalion commander in JROTC, no one asked about it. It was like they'd decided that if they ignored this version of me long enough, I'd eventually become the daughter they actually wanted. The only person who listened, who understood, who believed in me, was Grandma Elena. Every few weeks, I'd drive out to her house and tell her about my progress, my plans, my dreams. She'd make her famous apple cinnamon tea and listen to every word like it was the most important thing she'd ever heard. "You remind me so much of Catherine," she'd say, looking at me with eyes that sparkled with pride. "You've got that same fire, that same certainty about who you're meant to be. Don't let anyone dim that light, Sarah. The world needs warriors like you." She was the one who helped me understand the congressional nomination process, who drove me to interviews when my parents refused to take time off work. She was the one who celebrated when I received my acceptance letter to the Naval Academy, even though I had to open it alone in her kitchen because I was too afraid to bring it home. I opened it. That acceptance letter sat in my backpack for 3 days before I finally worked up the courage to tell my family. I'd rehearsed what I would say, how I would frame it as an honor, an achievement they could be proud of. I'd practiced staying calm, staying respectful, staying hopeful that they might finally see what I saw. I chose a Sunday dinner to make the announcement. We were all gathered around the dining room table, Mom's good china reflecting the light from the chandelier. Marcus was talking about his internship. Vanessa was describing her latest composition. It felt like the right moment, the kind of family scene where good news should be shared. "I have something to tell everyone," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. The conversation stopped. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward me, and I could feel the weight of their attention like a physical thing. "I got accepted to the United States Naval Academy," I said. "Full scholarship. I'll be commissioned as an officer in the Navy after graduation." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Mom's hand went to her throat like she was checking for a pulse. Marcus leaned back in his chair with that smirk that meant he was about to say something cutting. Vanessa just stared at me like I'd announced I was joining a cult. Finally, Dad spoke. "No." That was it. Just no. Like my acceptance to one of the most prestigious military academies in the country was a request for permission instead of an accomplished fact. "Dad, you don't understand," I started. I said no, Sarah. His voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. "You are not going to throw your life away on this fantasy. You are going to the University of Virginia like your brother. You are going to study something practical. And you are going to stop this ridiculous behavior that's embarrassing our entire family." The fight that followed was unlike anything our family had ever experienced. I'd seen my parents disagree before, small tensions over household decisions or scheduling conflicts, but nothing had ever shattered the Mitchell family's carefully maintained composure, like my determination to attend the Naval Academy. "This isn't a discussion, Sarah," Mom said, her voice trembling with barely controlled emotion. "We've been patient with this phase of yours, but enough is enough. You're going to decline that acceptance and apply to proper schools like a sensible young woman." I felt something crack inside my chest, not breaking but shifting, like tectonic plates realigning before an earthquake. "I'm not declining anything. This is my life, my choice, my future." Marcus laughed, that sharp bark of dismissal he'd perfected over the years. "Your future? Sarah, you're 18 years old. You don't know what your future looks like. Mom and Dad have been planning your education since you were born. They know what's best for you." "Planning my education or planning my life?" I shot back. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've all decided who I'm supposed to be, without ever asking what I actually want." Dad's face was turning red, the way it did when quarterly reports came in under expectations. "What do you want? What you want doesn't pay bills, Sarah. What you want doesn't build a stable life. What you want is a fantasy created by too many action movies, and not enough understanding of how the real world works." "The real world?" I stood up from the table, my napkin falling to the floor. "Dad, I've been living in the real world. I've been training for this for 4 years. I've met every academic requirement, every physical standard, every leadership benchmark. I've earned this." Vanessa spoke up for the first time, her voice soft but cutting. "Sarah, we're just worried about you. The military, it's not a place for people like us. It's dangerous, it's unpredictable, and it's going to change you into someone we don't recognize." "People like us?" The words tasted bitter. "You mean people with privilege? People with options? Or do you mean women who are supposed to be grateful for whatever safe, small life gets handed to them?" Mom's composure finally cracked. "Don't you dare take that tone with me, young lady. We have given you everything. A beautiful home, excellent education, opportunities most people only dream of. And this is how you repay us? By throwing it all away to play dress-up in a uniform?" "Play dress-up?" My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "Mom, do you have any idea what it takes to get into the Naval Academy? Do you know the acceptance rate? The standards? This isn't playing dress-up. This is one of the most challenging academic and military institutions in the country." Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the china jump. "I don't care if it's Harvard, Princeton, and MIT rolled into one. You are not going. End of discussion." "It's not your decision to make," I said quietly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dad's eyes narrowed, and when he spoke, his voice was dangerously calm. "As long as you live under my roof, as long as I pay your bills, as long as you carry the Mitchell name, it absolutely is my decision. You will go to UVA, you will study business or education, and you will stop this embarrassing charade that's making our entire family look like we can't control our own children." That's when I understood. This wasn't about my safety or my future or even their love for me. This was about control, about maintaining the image they'd spent decades building. I was a crack in their perfect facade, and they needed to seal me up before I spread. "What if I refuse?" I asked. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of frustration, of disappointment in a daughter who refused to be molded into the shape they'd designed for her. "Then you'll do it without our support," Dad said finally. "Financial, emotional, or otherwise. You want to make adult decisions? Then you can deal with adult consequences." I looked around the table at the 3 people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Marcus was shaking his head like I was a lost cause. Vanessa was staring at her plate, refusing to meet my eyes. Mom was dabbing at her face with her napkin, the picture of wounded motherhood. Dad was stone-faced, immovable as a mountain. "Fine," I said. "I'll do it without you." I turned and walked toward the stairs, my legs surprisingly steady considering my entire world had just shifted on its axis. Behind me, I heard Mom's voice, high and strained. "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, you come back here this instant." I didn't turn around. I climbed those stairs I'd run up and down thousands of times as a child, walked down the hallway lined with family photos that would probably be edited to remove me, and closed my bedroom door with a soft click that felt like a gunshot. That night, I sat on my bed surrounded by Naval Academy information packets, recommendation letters, and acceptance documents. Everything I'd worked for, everything I dreamed of, spread out like evidence of a crime I was apparently committing against my family's expectations. My phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa, "Just apologize and this will all blow over. You know how Dad gets." Then Marcus, "Seriously, Sarah? You're really going to destroy the family over this?" And finally, Mom, "We love you, sweetheart. We just want what's best for you. Please reconsider." I turned my phone face down and didn't respond to any of them. What was the point? They'd made it clear that their love came with conditions, and I'd just violated the most important one, being the daughter they wanted instead of the person I actually was. The next few weeks passed in a cold war. My parents spoke to me only when necessary, their voices polite and distant like I was a troublesome houseguest they couldn't wait to see leave. Marcus ignored me entirely, and Vanessa tried to play peacekeeper with awkward attempts at normal conversation that fooled neither of us. I threw myself into preparation for the academy with renewed intensity. Physical training at 5 a.m., academic review, leadership exercises with my JROTC unit. Colonel Davies became my unofficial mentor, helping me understand what to expect during plebe summer, the brutal orientation period that would either break me or forge me into something stronger. "You sure about this, Mitchell?" he asked one afternoon after a particularly intense training session. "It's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done, and it sounds like you're going to be doing it without your family's support." I wiped sweat from my forehead and met his eyes steadily. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life, sir." He nodded slowly. "Good. Because doubt is the first thing they'll exploit. If you go in knowing exactly why you're there and what you're fighting for, you'll make it through anything they throw at you." But even as I maintained my resolve during the day, the nights were harder. I'd lie in bed listening to the familiar sounds of my family's evening routine. Dad watching the news, Mom on the phone with her book club friends, Marcus playing guitar, Vanessa practicing piano. The sounds of a life I was apparently no longer welcome to share. 3 weeks before I was supposed to report to Annapolis, Grandma Elena called. She'd been in the hospital with pneumonia, something the family had carefully avoided mentioning to me. When I drove out to see her, I found her sitting up in bed, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her, but with the same fierce light in her eyes. "There's my warrior," she said, reaching for my hand with fingers that felt like bird bones. "Tell me everything. How are you preparing? Are you excited? Are you terrified?" I told her about my training, about the books I'd been reading, about the nervous energy that kept me awake at night. I told her about the cold silence at home, about feeling like I was betraying my family by choosing myself. She listened to every word, nodding occasionally, squeezing my hand when my voice threatened to break. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, staring out the hospital window at the parking lot below. "Sarah," she said finally, "I need to tell you something about Catherine, about that photo I showed you all those years ago." I leaned closer, sensing this was important. Catherine wasn't just a truck driver in World War II, she was a spy. She drove those supply trucks into occupied territory, gathered intelligence, saved lives in ways that are still classified 70 years later. She never got credit for what she really did because women weren't supposed to be capable of that kind of courage, that kind of sacrifice. My grandmother's eyes met mine, and I saw decades of regret and pride warring in her expression. When Catherine came home from the war, her family was ashamed of her. They thought she'd done inappropriate things, unseemly things for a woman. They tried to make her pretend it never happened, tried to marry her off to some nice boy who would help her forget all that unpleasant business about serving her country. I felt my heart skip a beat. What did she do? She left, Grandma Elena said simply. She walked away from people who couldn't see her for who she really was, and she built a life with people who could. She became a teacher, helped other young women find their own courage. She never married, never had children, but she had a purpose. She had herself. Tears were running down my cheeks now, though I wasn't sure when they'd started. Catherine used to write me letters, Grandma Elena continued. She said the hardest thing about choosing yourself is that it feels like you're choosing against the people you love. But sometimes loving yourself is the most radical thing you can do, especially when you're surrounded by people who need you to be smaller than you are. She reached into her bedside table and pulled out an envelope, yellow with age and handled with obvious care. This is the last letter Catherine wrote me, right before she died. I've been saving it for the right person, the right moment. She pressed it into my hands. I think that person is you, and I think that moment is now. My hands shook as I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. Catherine's handwriting was small and precise, the words written in fading blue ink. Elena, my dear friend, I am writing this knowing it may be my final letter to you. I want you to know that I have never regretted the choice I made to leave our family, to build a life on my own terms. It was frightening, yes. It was lonely at times, but it was mine. I think about the young women who will come after us, the ones who will face the same impossible choice between belonging and becoming. I hope they will be braver than I was. I hope they will know that they don't have to choose between loving their families and loving themselves. But if they must choose, they should choose themselves every time. The world needs warriors, Elena. Not just on battlefields, but in boardrooms and classrooms and hospital rooms and anywhere else that someone needs to stand up and say, this is who I am, and I will not apologize for it. Tell the warrior in your family that she has my blessing, my admiration, and my absolute certainty that she will change the world. I was crying openly now, clutching the letter like a lifeline. She knew, I whispered, she knew there would be someone like me. Grandma Elena smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the woman in those old photos, fierce and proud and unafraid. She knew because there's always someone like you, sweetheart. In every generation, in every family, there's always someone who's brave enough to break the mold. I left the hospital that day with Catherine's letter folded carefully in my wallet, but I also left with something heavier, the knowledge that my grandmother was sicker than anyone had told me. The nurses spoke in hushed tones about treatment options and family conferences that I apparently wasn't invited to attend. When I asked Mom about it that evening, she brushed off my concerns with the same dismissive tone she'd been using for weeks. Grandma Elena is fine, Sarah. She just needs rest. The doctors say she'll recover completely with proper care. Mom didn't meet my eyes when she said it, and I knew she was lying. The distance between my family and me had grown so wide that even medical emergencies weren't enough to bridge it. They'd rather handle Grandma Elena's illness without me than admit they might need my support, my presence, or my love. 2 days later, I made a decision that would haunt me for years to come. I stopped trying to force my way back into their lives. If they wanted to freeze me out, if they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, then I would make it easier for them. I started eating dinner in my room, stopped participating in family conversations, stopped hoping that one of them would knock on my door and tell me they'd changed their minds. Instead, I poured everything into preparing for the academy. I ran 10 miles every morning before dawn, practiced military protocols until they became second nature, studied naval history with the intensity of someone preparing for the most important exam of their life, because in many ways, I was. Colonel Davies helped me understand that Plebe Summer would be designed to break down everything I thought I knew about myself and rebuild it into something stronger. They're going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed, he warned during one of our final training sessions. They're going to make you question everything, your abilities, your commitment, your worthiness to wear the uniform. The only thing that will get you through is knowing exactly why you're there. I knew why I was there. I was there because every cell in my body, every beat of my heart, every thought in my head told me this was where I belonged. I was there because I'd rather face the unknown challenges of military service than spend one more day pretending to be someone I wasn't. The week before I was supposed to leave for Annapolis, Grandma Elena took a turn for the worse. I found out not from my family but from Mrs. Henderson, our next-door neighbor, who mentioned it casually while I was checking the mail. "Such a shame about your grandmother," she said, shaking her head sympathetically. "Your mother mentioned she's back in the ICU. I do hope she pulls through." My blood turned to ice. Back in the ICU? How long had she been there? Why hadn't anyone told me? I drove to the hospital immediately, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I reached her room, I found my entire family gathered around her bed, everyone except me. Mom, Dad, Marcus, Vanessa, and even some cousins I hadn't seen in years. They were holding hands in a circle, heads bowed in prayer. I stood in the doorway, invisible and unwelcome, watching them say goodbye to the one person who had ever truly understood me. Grandma Elena lay unconscious, her breathing shallow and labored, machines beeping softly around her like a mechanical lullaby. Finally, Mom looked up and saw me. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, and then something that looked like anger. "Sarah," she said quietly, "you shouldn't be here." The words hit me like a physical blow. "She's my grandmother, too." "She's resting," Dad said, without looking at me. "The doctors said too many visitors might overwhelm her." Too many visitors. As if I were some stranger who'd wandered off the street instead of the granddaughter who'd spent countless afternoons in Grandma Elena's kitchen, listening to her stories and sharing my dreams. Marcus stood up from his chair beside the bed. "Maybe you should go, Sarah. This is a family matter." A family matter. The phrase echoed in my head as I stared at the people who'd given birth to me, raised me, shared 18 years of Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations and ordinary Tuesday dinners. Apparently, none of that made me family anymore. 5 minutes, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just let me say goodbye." Mom's face softened slightly, and for a moment I thought she might relent, but then Dad shook his head firmly. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but you made your choice. You chose the military over your family. You can't have it both ways." I wanted to scream that I hadn't chosen the military over my family. I'd chosen myself over their version of who I should be. I wanted to tell them that leaving didn't mean I loved them any less, that pursuing my dreams didn't cancel out 18 years of shared history. I wanted to explain that I was still their daughter, still Marcus's sister, still Vanessa's sibling, even if I was wearing a different uniform than they'd planned. But I could see in their faces that none of that mattered. They'd drawn their lines, chosen their sides, and I was standing on the wrong side of the battlefield. I took one last look at Grandma Elena, willing her to wake up, to open her eyes and tell them all to stop being ridiculous, to remember that love was supposed to be bigger than disagreement. But she remained still, her chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. "I love you, Grandma," I whispered from the doorway. "Thank you for believing in me." Then I turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing down the hospital corridor like gunshots. Grandma Elena died 2 days later, while I was in my final pre-departure briefing at the ROTC unit. I found out the same way I'd learned about her hospitalization, from Mrs. Henderson, who saw the hearse in their driveway and called to offer condolences. I hung up the phone and sat in my empty room, surrounded by packed duffel bags and academy preparation materials, trying to process the fact that the one person who'd supported my dreams was gone. The funeral was scheduled for the day before I was supposed to report to Annapolis. That evening, I called Mom. It was the first time we'd spoken since the hospital incident. "I want to come to the funeral," I said without preamble. There was a long pause, and I could hear voices in the background. Family members arriving to help with arrangements, probably the same cousins who'd been gathered around Grandma Elena's bed. "Sarah," Mom said finally, her voice tired and strained, "I don't think that's a good idea." She was my grandmother. I loved her. I deserved to say goodbye. You said goodbye at the hospital, Dad's voice cut in. He must have been listening on another extension. We're trying to have a peaceful service for family members who actually cared about Elena, not for people who were too busy with their own agendas to visit her properly. The accusation was like a knife between my ribs. Too busy to visit her properly? I'd been visiting Grandma Elena regularly for years. I'd been the one who drove her to doctor appointments when her arthritis made it hard to hold the steering wheel. I'd been the one who helped her reorganize her photo albums and listen to the same stories about Catherine dozens of times because they made her happy. That's not fair, I said. You know how much I loved her. You know how much she meant to me. What we know, Mom said, is that you chose to break this family apart right when Elena needed us most. What we know is that your selfishness caused her tremendous stress during her final weeks. What we know is that she died heartbroken because her granddaughter cared more about playing soldier than being present for the people who loved her. Each word was calculated to inflict maximum damage, and they succeeded. I felt like I was drowning, like the air had been sucked out of my lungs and replaced with guilt and grief and rage. You're lying, I whispered. Grandma Elena supported my decision. She understood. Elena was too kind to tell you the truth, Dad interrupted. She was devastated that you were throwing your life away. She just didn't want to hurt your feelings by saying so. I thought about Catherine's letter, still folded in my wallet. I thought about Grandma Elena's proud smile when I told her about my academy acceptance. I thought about her calling me my warrior, with tears of joy in her eyes. They were rewriting history, turning my biggest supporter into another voice of disapproval. They were stealing even my memories of unconditional love. Please, I said, hating how broken my voice sounded, just let me come to the funeral. I won't cause any problems, I just want to honor her memory. The silence stretched so long I wondered if they'd hung up. Finally, Mom spoke, and her voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. The funeral is for family only, Sarah. Since you've made it clear that you don't consider yourself part of this family anymore, I don't think your presence would be appropriate. Mom? We'll tell Elena you were too busy with your military training to attend. I'm sure she would have understood your priorities. The line went dead. I sat holding the phone for a long time, listening to the dial tone and trying to comprehend what had just happened. They'd banned me from my own grandmother's funeral. They'd chosen to let people think I didn't care enough to show up, rather than admit that I cared too much in the wrong way. That night, I drove out to Grandma Elena's house one last time. The driveway was empty, the windows dark. I sat in my car for hours, remembering all the afternoons we'd spent together, all the conversations that had shaped who I was becoming. I thought about her apple cinnamon tea and her stories about Catherine, and the way she'd looked at me like I was exactly who I was supposed to be. Around midnight, I got out of the car and walked to the front door. I knew where she kept the spare key, under the ceramic frog beside the porch steps. I let myself in and stood in her kitchen, breathing in the lingering scent of vanilla and cinnamon that always clung to the curtains. On her refrigerator, held up with a magnet shaped like a lighthouse, was a photo from my ROTC promotion ceremony. She'd printed it out and written on the back, "My granddaughter, the warrior, so proud." I took the photo and left the key on the kitchen counter. As I drove away, I made a promise to both Grandma Elena and myself. I would become everything she'd believed I could be, not to prove my family wrong, but to honor the faith she'd placed in me. The next morning, I loaded my bags into my car and drove toward Annapolis. As I passed the cemetery where Grandma Elena's funeral was being held, I could see cars gathered around a green canopy, people in black standing in a circle. My family saying goodbye without me. I didn't stop. I kept driving toward my future, carrying Catherine's letter, Grandma Elena's photo, and the unshakable certainty that some battles are worth fighting, even when you have to fight them alone. The gates of the Naval Academy appeared through my windshield like the entrance to another world. Massive stone pillars topped with bronze eagles, American flags snapping in the Chesapeake Bay breeze, and beyond them, a campus that looked like it had been carved from marble and tradition. I pulled into the visitor parking lot, turned off my engine, and sat for a moment in the sudden silence. This was it. The moment I'd been preparing for, dreaming about, fighting for, and I was facing it completely alone. Around me, other cars were pulling up, and I watched families emerge. Mothers fussing over last-minute details, fathers carrying duffel bags, siblings snapping photos and making jokes to ease the tension. One family near my car was having what looked like a final family meeting, all of them huddled together, while the future midshipman nodded seriously at whatever advice was being dispensed. I grabbed my bags from the trunk and walked toward the processing center, surrounded by other incoming plebes and their support systems. The contrast was stark and painful. Me with my single duffel bag and backpack, them with entourages of people who'd driven hours to see them off. "First time away from home?" asked a woman standing in line ahead of me. She was probably someone's mother, wearing a Naval Academy Parents Association t-shirt and clutching a camera like a lifeline. "Something like that," I replied, not trusting my voice to say more. She smiled sympathetically. "It's hard on the families, too. We're all so proud, but letting go is never easy." She glanced around, clearly looking for my own family contingent. "Are your parents getting coffee? The line for the visitor center is pretty long." "They couldn't make it," I said simply. Her face fell slightly, the kind of expression people get when they realize they've stepped into someone else's pain. "Oh, I'm sorry. Work obligations?" I nodded rather than explain that my family was attending my grandmother's funeral instead, that they'd chosen grief over celebrating my achievements, that I'd been effectively excommunicated from the Mitchell family for the crime of choosing my own path. The processing line moved with military efficiency, bags searched, documents verified, medical records reviewed. When they asked for emergency contact information, I hesitated for a long moment before writing down Colonel Davies's name and number. He'd volunteered to be my point of contact, understanding without being told that my family wouldn't be available for that role. "Mitchell, Sarah E.," the processing officer called out, checking my name off his list. "Congratulations, please. You're about to begin the most challenging experience of your life." He had no idea how challenging my life had already become. The first few hours of plebe summer were a blur of shouting, running, and controlled chaos, designed to strip away civilian identity and begin forging something new. We were issued uniforms, assigned room numbers, and taught basic military bearing by upperclassmen who seemed to have been specially trained in creative intimidation. "Drop and give me 20 was apparently the Academy's preferred greeting, followed closely by, "What's your excuse, plebe?" and, "I can't hear you." My roommate was Jessica Chen from California, a slight girl with serious eyes who'd graduated valedictorian from her high school. During our first brief conversation between training sessions, I learned that her parents were both engineers, that she had 2 older brothers who'd attended West Point, and that her entire extended family had driven up from San Diego to see her off. "What about your family?" she asked, as we attempted to make our racks according to standards that seemed to require engineering degrees to achieve. "Couldn't make it," I repeated, the lie becoming easier each time I told it. Jessica nodded, but I could see the questions in her eyes. What kind of family doesn't show up for this? What kind of parents miss their daughter entering one of the most prestigious military academies in the country? The kind who'd rather pretend their daughter doesn't exist than admit she might know what's best for her own life. The physical challenges of plebe summer were exactly what I'd expected. Dawn runs that left us gasping, obstacle courses that tested every muscle group, endless drills in formation marching and weapon handling. But the mental challenges were harder to anticipate. The constant pressure, the deliberate attempt to break down individual identity, the way upperclassmen seemed to know exactly which buttons to push to find your breaking point. "Mitchell!" Midshipman First Class Rodriguez bellowed during our 3rd week. "What's your problem, plebe? You look like someone died." Someone had died. My grandmother had died while I was learning military customs, and I'd missed her funeral because my family had decided I didn't deserve to attend. But I couldn't say that. I couldn't explain that I was carrying grief alongside my rifle, that I was homesick for a home that no longer wanted me. "No excuse, sir," I shouted back, the standard response that covered everything and explained nothing. "That's right, Mitchell, no excuse. Whatever personal drama you've got going on, you leave it in civilian world. Here, you've got one job. Become a naval officer. You think you can handle that?" "Yes, sir." "I can't hear you." "Yes, sir." But late at night, lying in my narrow rack while Jessica slept quietly across the room, I wondered if I really could handle it. Not the physical demands or the academic challenges, but the isolation. The knowledge that every other plebe in our company had someone rooting for them. Someone counting down the days until visiting weekend. Someone who would celebrate their graduation in 4 years. I had Catherine's letter, carefully hidden between the pages of my calculus textbook, and Grandma Elena's photo tucked into my academy handbook. But some nights, that felt like very thin armor against the weight of being completely alone. The breaking point came during our 4th week, during what the upperclassmen called motivation sessions, basically psychological warfare disguised as leadership training. We were lined up against the wall in our underwear and t-shirts while Midshipman Rodriguez and his team subjected us to intense questioning designed to find our weakest points. "Chen," Rodriguez barked at my roommate, "what's the most important thing in your life?" "My family, sir." "Good answer. They're proud of WIOU, aren't they?" "Yes, sir." "They call you every week, don't they?" "Yes, sir." "Nice to have support, isn't it, Chen?" "Yes, sir." Then his attention turned to me and I saw something predatory in his eyes, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Mitchell, what's the most important thing in your life?" "Serving my country, sir." "Wrong answer, Mitchell. Family comes first. Where's your family, Mitchell?" My throat felt like it was closing. "They couldn't be here, sir." "Couldn't be here? Oh, didn't want to be here. There's a difference, Mitchell." I could feel sweat running down my back and not from physical exertion. "No excuse, sir." "That's right, no excuse. Because they don't support you, do they, Mitchell? They think you're making a mistake. They think you don't belong here." The words hit like physical blows because they were true. Every accusation, every assumption, every cruel observation was exactly what I'd been trying not to think about for weeks. "No, sir. They what, Mitchell? They're proud of you? Then where are they? Why haven't they called? Why aren't they coming for Parents' Weekend?" I was drowning. In front of 30 other plebes, in front of the upperclassmen whose respect I desperately wanted to earn, I was falling apart. My carefully constructed composure was cracking, and everyone could see it happening. "Maybe they're right, Mitchell. Maybe you don't belong here. Maybe you should quit and go home to Mommy and Daddy." Something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped into place. Like a bone setting after a fracture, painful but necessary. "They're not right, sir," I shouted, louder than I'd ever shouted anything in my life. "They're afraid. They're afraid because I'm becoming something they don't understand, something they can't control." The room went dead silent. Rodriguez's eyes widened slightly, and I realized I'd just committed the cardinal sin of plebe summer. I'd spoken out of turn, shown emotion, revealed weakness. But I wasn't finished. "I don't need their permission to be here, sir. I don't need their approval to serve my country. I earned this. I belong here." Rodriguez stared at me for what felt like an eternity. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Not the predatory grin he'd been wearing all evening, but something that looked almost like respect. Well, Mitchell. Looks like you found your backbone. About time." He moved on to the next plebe, but something had fundamentally changed. Not just in how he saw me, but in how I saw myself. I wasn't here because my family supported me. I wasn't here because it was the path of least resistance. I was here because I'd chosen to be here, because I'd fought to be here, because I belonged here, regardless of what anyone else thought. After the session ended and we were dismissed to our rooms, Jessica looked at me with new eyes. "That was incredible," she said quietly. "I've never seen anyone stand up to Rodriguez like that." "I wasn't standing up to him," I replied. "I was standing up for myself." That night, I wrote my first letter to Grandma Elena. I knew she was gone, knew she'd never read it, but I needed to tell her about what had happened. About the moment I'd found my voice and used it to claim my place in the world she'd encouraged me to inhabit. "Dear Grandma Elena," I wrote, "today I understood what you meant about choosing yourself. It's not about rejecting the people you love. It's about refusing to reject yourself for their comfort. I'm becoming the warrior you always knew I could be, and I'm doing it for both of us." I folded the letter and tucked it next to Catherine's photo. Someday when I graduated, when I earned my commission, when I proved that choosing myself had been the right decision, I would visit her grave and read it to her. But for now, it was enough to know that I was becoming exactly who she'd believed I could be, even if I had to do it alone. The months that followed that confrontation with Rodriguez marked a fundamental shift in how I approached my time at the academy. Instead of trying to prove I belonged despite my family's absence, I began to understand that their absence might actually be an advantage. While other plebes struggled with homesickness and divided loyalties, I could focus entirely on becoming the officer I was meant to be. My academic performance reflected this new clarity of purpose. Naval history, leadership theory, engineering mathematics, subjects that might have felt overwhelming to someone juggling family expectations became fascinating puzzles to solve. I stayed late in the library not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand every aspect of naval warfare, military strategy, and the complex ethics of command. Professor Martinez, who taught our naval leadership course, pulled me aside after class one afternoon in October. "Mitchell, your analysis of the Battle of Midway was exceptional. Have you considered applying for the honors program?" The honors program meant additional coursework, higher expectations, and more visibility among the faculty and administration. It also meant more pressure, more scrutiny, and less margin for error. "I'd be honored to apply, sir," I said without hesitation. He smiled and handed me the application packet. "The deadline is next week. I'll write you a recommendation, but you'll need 2 more faculty endorsements and a detailed essay on your leadership philosophy." Walking back to Bancroft Hall with the application in my hands, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: pure excitement, untainted by doubt or the need for anyone else's approval. This opportunity was mine to earn, mine to win or lose, based entirely on my own merit. Jessica was studying at her desk when I entered our room, surrounded by calculus textbooks and what looked like enough coffee cups to fuel a small destroyer. "You look like someone just told you Christmas is coming early," she observed, not looking up from her differential equations. "Maybe it is," I replied, sitting down at my own desk and opening the honors program application. That evening, while other plebes called home or wrote letters to family members, I crafted my leadership philosophy essay. I wrote about servant leadership, about the responsibility that comes with authority, about leading by example rather than intimidation. But mostly I wrote about courage. Not just the physical courage required in combat, but the moral courage needed to stand up for what's right, even when you're standing alone. True leadership, I wrote, isn't about having followers who agree with you. It's about having the conviction to do what's right, even when everyone you care about thinks you're wrong. It's about understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is refuse to become smaller so they can feel more comfortable. I thought about Grandma Elena as I wrote those words, about Catherine's letter, about the choice to honor yourself even when it costs you everything familiar and safe. The essay was due on a Friday. I submitted it Thursday evening and tried not to think about the selection process, the competition from other qualified candidates, or the possibility of rejection. Instead, I threw myself into our upcoming seamanship exam and a major project for our naval architecture course. But concentration proved difficult when, that same Thursday evening, I received an unexpected visitor. Midshipman First Class Rodriguez knocked on our door during the evening study period, which was unusual enough to make both Jessica and me stop what we were doing. "Mitchell," he said, "you have a visitor at the gate." My heart stopped. Visitors during the week were rare and usually indicated some kind of emergency. Family emergency. But my family had made it clear I was no longer their emergency contact, just as they were no longer mine. "Who is it?" I asked, already pulling on my dress uniform jacket. "A civilian woman says she's your aunt, Elena Rodriguez." The name hit me like a physical blow. Rodriguez, not Mitchell. Grandma Elena's maiden name, the name she'd carried before marriage, before becoming part of a family that ultimately rejected one of their own. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. I followed Rodriguez through the corridors of Bancroft Hall, my mind racing. I had no aunt named Elena Rodriguez. Grandma Elena had been my mother's mother, and Mom was an only child. This had to be some kind of mistake, or worse, some kind of test designed to evaluate how I handled unexpected situations. The visitors' area was a sterile room with plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Sitting alone near the window was a woman I'd never seen before, probably in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and clothes that suggested both elegance and practicality. When she saw me, she stood up with the kind of grace that spoke of military bearing, and I noticed something that made my breath catch. She had Grandma Elena's eyes. The same intelligent spark, the same warmth, the same way of looking at you like she could see straight through to your soul. "Sarah," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Maria Rodriguez. I was your grandmother's closest friend, and I think it's time we talked." I shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that suggested someone who'd worked with her hands. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I think there's been some confusion. My grandmother's name was Elena Mitchell, and she died 3 months ago while you were banned from her funeral," Maria finished gently. "Yes, I know. I was there. I was also the one who convinced her to write that letter she gave you, the one from Catherine." My knees almost buckled. This woman knew about Catherine's letter, about the funeral, about everything my family had done to erase me from Grandma Elena's final chapter. "How do you—" "Sit down, Sarah. There's a lot you don't know about your grandmother, about your family, and about why your parents were so terrified of your military ambitions." I sat, my mind reeling. Maria settled into the chair across from me, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Through the window I could see the Chesapeake Bay reflecting the late afternoon sun, sailboats moving across the water like white birds. "Your grandmother Elena and I served together," Maria said finally. "Korea, 1952 to 1954. We were Navy nurses, stationed at a field hospital about 20 miles from the front lines." The words didn't compute at first. Grandma Elena had never mentioned military service. In all our conversations about Catherine, about military history, about my own ambitions, she'd never once said that she'd served herself. "That's impossible," I said. "Grandma Elena was never in the military. She was a teacher, then a homemaker. She married my grandfather when she was 19. Maria smiled sadly. "She was a teacher after the war. She married your grandfather when she was 23, after she came home from Korea. The family has rewritten that history so thoroughly that even you don't know the truth about your own grandmother." She reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph, black and white and creased with age. It showed 2 young women in military uniforms, standing beside a medical tent. One of them was unmistakably a younger version of Grandma Elena, but instead of the soft domesticity I'd always associated with her, this version looked fierce, competent, and unafraid. "That's us at the 8055th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital," Maria said. "Your grandmother saved more lives in 2 years than most people save in a lifetime. She was decorated for valor after she crawled into a collapsed bunker to treat wounded soldiers during an artillery attack." I stared at the photograph, trying to reconcile this warrior woman with the grandmother who'd baked cookies and told me bedtime stories about Catherine's adventures. "Why didn't she tell me?" I whispered. "Because your parents made her promise never to talk about it. They were ashamed of having a mother and mother-in-law who'd served in combat, who'd seen things that proper women weren't supposed to see. They convinced her that her service was something to hide, something that might give you dangerous ideas about what women could accomplish." The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. No wonder my parents had reacted so violently to my military ambitions. No wonder they'd been so desperate to keep me away from Grandma Elena during her final weeks. They weren't just afraid I'd become someone they couldn't control, they were afraid I'd become someone just like her. "She wanted to tell you," Maria continued. "Especially after you got accepted to the academy. She was so proud, Sarah. So incredibly proud. She said you reminded her of herself at 18, determined to serve something bigger than yourself, regardless of what anyone else thought." Tears were running down my cheeks now, and I didn't try to stop them. They told me she was disappointed in my choice. They said she died heartbroken because I was throwing my life away. Maria's face hardened. "They lied to you." Elena spent her final weeks talking about how excited she was to see you graduate, how she couldn't wait to tell you about Korea, about the things she'd seen and done. She had a whole collection of photos and medals hidden in her attic that she was planning to give you. What happened to them? Your parents threw them away. After the funeral, they cleaned out her house and got rid of anything that might remind you or anyone else that Elena Rodriguez had been a combat nurse who'd served her country with distinction. The betrayal was so complete, so deliberately cruel, that I could barely breathe. They hadn't just banned me from her funeral. They'd erased her true identity, stolen her legacy, and tried to rewrite both our stories to fit their narrow vision of what women should be. "There's more," Maria said gently. "Elena asked me to give you something if anything happened to her. She was worried that your family might try to keep it from you." She reached into her purse again and pulled out a small velvet box, the kind that might hold jewelry or medals. Inside, nestled in faded silk, was a military decoration I didn't immediately recognize, a bronze star with a small V device. "Bronze Star with Valor," Maria explained. "For her actions during the bunker collapse. She never wore it, never displayed it, but she kept it her entire life. She wanted you to have it, to know that courage runs in your family, even if some people are too afraid to acknowledge it." I held the medal in my hands, feeling its weight, imagining Grandma Elena earning it under circumstances I could barely comprehend. This woman who'd made me apple cinnamon tea and listened to my dreams had once crawled through enemy fire to save lives. This woman who'd encouraged my military ambitions had hidden her own service for decades to keep peace with a family that was ashamed of her strength. "She left you a letter, too," Maria said, handing me an envelope with my name written in Grandma Elena's familiar handwriting. "She wrote it the night before she went into the hospital for the last time. She wanted to make sure you knew the truth, no matter what anyone else told you." My hands shook as I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Sarah, my warrior granddaughter, if Maria is giving you this letter, it means I'm gone, and your parents have probably told you terrible lies about my feelings toward your choice to serve. I need you to know the truth. I have never been more proud of anyone in my entire life than I am of you. You are following a path I walked more than 60 years ago, and it's the most important work in the world. When I served in Korea, I learned that protecting others isn't just a job. It's a calling. Not everyone can answer that call, and not everyone should, but you can, and you must. Your parents are afraid because they know what I know, that you're going to be extraordinary. They're afraid because women like us don't fit into the small boxes they've built for us. They're afraid because once you put on that uniform, you'll never again be willing to pretend you're smaller than you are. I want you to know that every medal they give you, every promotion you earn, every life you save will also belong to me. Through you, I get to serve again. Through you, my own service finally means something. Be brave, my darling girl. Be fierce. Be everything they're afraid you might become. All my love and admiration, Grandma Elena." I read the letter 3 times before I could see clearly enough to look up at Maria, who was watching me with the patience of someone who'd delivered difficult truths before. "She loved you exactly as you are," Maria said simply. "She was proud of you exactly as you are. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Maria's visit changed everything about how I approached the remaining months of my plebe year. Instead of carrying the weight of family disappointment, I now carried the legacy of 2 warrior women who'd paved the way for my service. Grandma Elena's bronze star sat in my desk drawer next to Catherine's letter, hidden but present, a tangible reminder that courage was indeed my birthright. The honors program acceptance letter arrived 2 weeks later, slipped under my door during morning formation. Jessica found it when we returned from breakfast, and her excited squeal brought half our company running to see what had happened. "Sarah got into the honors program," she announced, waving the letter like a victory flag. "This is huge! Do you know how competitive this is?" I did know. Out of our class of over 1,000 plebes, only 30 had been selected. It meant advanced coursework, special seminars with distinguished faculty, and opportunities for research projects that could shape my entire naval career. It also meant I was no longer just surviving the academy. I was thriving. But the real test came during our first honors seminar, taught by Captain Reynolds, a decorated submariner, who'd commanded nuclear vessels in some of the Navy's most sensitive operations. The topic was leadership under extreme pressure, and our first assignment was to analyze a historical military decision and present our findings to the class. While other students chose famous battles or well-documented campaigns, I found myself drawn to the Korean War medical units where Grandma Elena had served. I spent hours in the Academy library digging through archived reports, medical records, and after-action summaries from the 8055th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. Basic, what I discovered was a pattern of extraordinary heroism by medical personnel who were technically non-combatants, but faced combat conditions daily. Nurses and doctors who treated wounded soldiers under artillery fire, who improvised life-saving procedures with inadequate supplies, who made split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death for dozens of patients. I found Grandma Elena's name in several official reports. Nurse Rodriguez displayed exceptional courage under fire, and Lieutenant Rodriguez's quick thinking prevented catastrophic casualties during the bunker collapse incident. Reading these dry military summaries, I could finally picture the young woman in Maria's photograph, the fierce professional who'd hidden her service for decades. My presentation was scheduled for a Thursday morning in November. I stood before 15 of the Academy's most promising midshipmen and one of its most demanding instructors, holding a folder that contained not just historical analysis, but pieces of my own family's hidden history. The Korean War medical units present a unique case study in leadership under extreme pressure, I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. These personnel faced combat conditions while maintaining their primary mission of preserving life, often with inadequate resources and under direct enemy fire. I clicked through slides showing photographs from various Mobile Army surgical hospitals, including one that featured a young nurse who looked remarkably like me. Captain Reynolds leaned forward in his chair, clearly intrigued by my unusual choice of subject matter. Leadership in these conditions required not just medical expertise, but the ability to make rapid decisions, maintain team cohesion under stress, and demonstrate physical courage while caring for others. Consider this incident from February 1953, when enemy artillery struck near the 8055th MASH facility. I recounted the bunker collapse incident, drawing from official reports but adding details I'd learned from Maria about the conditions, the casualties, the split-second decision to crawl into unstable wreckage to reach wounded soldiers. The nurse who entered that collapsed bunker had to balance multiple factors: her own safety, the stability of the structure, the medical needs of the trapped soldiers, and the risk to rescue personnel. Her decision to proceed despite obvious danger saved 3 lives, and demonstrated a form of leadership that goes beyond rank or formal authority. When I finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Captain Reynolds was studying me with the intense focus I'd learned to associate with senior officers who were trying to understand something important. "Impressive research, Midshipman Mitchell," he said finally, "but I'm curious about your choice of topic. Most students analyze famous battles or well-known commanders. What drew you to medical personnel in Korea?" This was the moment I'd been preparing for, the choice between the safe answer and the truthful one, because one of those nurses was my grandmother, sir. And I wanted to understand what kind of leadership it takes to save lives when everyone around you is trying to take them. The silence that followed was electric. My classmates looked stunned. It's one thing to analyze historical events academically, quite another to reveal they're part of your personal heritage. Captain Reynolds nodded slowly. "Your grandmother served in Korea?" "Yes, sir. Lieutenant Elena Rodriguez, Bronze Star with Valor. She died while I was here at the Academy, and I only recently learned about her service." "Why recently?" The question hung in the air, and I realized I had a choice to make. I could give a vague answer about family privacy, or I could tell the truth about why my grandmother's heroism had been hidden from me. "Because my family was ashamed of her service, sir. They believed military service was inappropriate for women, so they convinced her to hide her medals, her stories, her entire military identity. I grew up knowing nothing about her courage because they were afraid it might influence me to follow a similar path." The room was dead silent now. Captain Reynolds was studying me with a new intensity, and I could see wheels turning behind his eyes. "And yet here you are," he observed. "Yes, sir, here I am." After class, Captain Reynolds asked me to stay behind. When the other students had filed out, he closed the door and settled into his chair with the deliberate movements of someone preparing for an important conversation. "Mitchell, what you shared today took considerable courage. Not many midshipmen would reveal that kind of family conflict, especially in an academic setting." "Yes, sir. It also suggests you're here despite significant opposition from the people who should be supporting you most." I thought about denying it, about offering some sanitized version of family dynamics that would be easier to hear. Instead, I met his eyes directly. "My family banned me from my grandmother's funeral because they disapproved of my decision to attend the academy, sir. They believe I'm throwing my life away and embarrassing the family name." Captain Reynolds was quiet for a long moment, and I wondered if I'd just committed career suicide by revealing too much personal information to a senior officer. "Do you know why I became a submarine officer, Mitchell?" The question caught me off guard. "No, sir." "Because my father told me I was too small, too quiet, too intellectual to ever make it in the military. He wanted me to become an accountant like him, to follow a safe, predictable path that wouldn't challenge anyone's expectations." He smiled, and for the first time since I'd known him, Captain Reynolds looked less like an intimidating authority figure and more like someone who understood exactly what I was going through. "Some of the best officers I've served with joined the Navy to prove their families wrong, but the truly exceptional ones joined to prove themselves right. Which category do you fall into?" The question hit deeper than he probably intended. Was I here to show my family they'd misjudged me, or was I here because this was genuinely where I belonged? "I used to think I was here to prove them wrong, sir. But now I think I'm here because this is who I've always been, regardless of whether they approve." Good answer. Because revenge is a poor foundation for a military career, but conviction will carry you through anything the Navy throws at you. He pulled a folder from his desk drawer and slid it across to me. "I'm recommending you for the leadership track in the honors program. It's an additional commitment, extra seminars, research projects, mentorship responsibilities with younger midshipmen. Interested?" I opened the folder and scanned the requirements. Advanced leadership theory, independent research project, thesis defense before a panel of senior officers. It was exactly the kind of challenge that would set me apart from my peers and position me for the most competitive assignments after graduation. "Very interested, sir." "There's one more thing, Mitchell. This track includes a summer internship with an active duty unit. You'd spend 6 weeks embedded with an operational command, observing real-world leadership in action. The assignments are competitive, but I think you'd be an excellent candidate for the submarine service." Submarines. The most demanding, most elite community in the Navy. The service required not just technical expertise, but the psychological strength to operate in isolation, under pressure, with no margin for error. "I'd be honored to apply, sir. Applications are due before Christmas break. Use your grandmother's story as the foundation for your essay. The Navy needs officers who understand that true leadership sometimes means standing alone." Walking back to Bancroft Hall that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Grandma Elena's death: genuine excitement about the future. Not nervous energy or desperate hope, but the calm confidence that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. Jessica was waiting in our room with the kind of barely contained enthusiasm that meant she had news to share. "How did your presentation go?" she asked before I'd even closed the door. "Better than expected," I replied, settling into my desk chair. "How was your calculus exam?" "Brutal, but that's not what I want to talk about. Sarah, I got a letter from home today, and my mom mentioned something weird. She said a woman called asking about you, about your family situation." My blood went cold. "What kind of woman?" "An older woman said she was trying to reach you, but the academy wouldn't give out contact information. She left a name, Maria something, and said it was about your grandmother's estate." Maria Rodriguez. The only person outside my family who knew the truth about Grandma Elena's service, about my parents' betrayal, about the medals and stories they'd tried to erase. "Did your mom give her any information?" "Just confirmed that you were at the academy and seemed to be doing well." "But Sarah, the woman asked specifically whether your family was supporting you, whether they'd been in touch. My mom thought it was strange." "It wasn't strange. It was Maria keeping her promise to Grandma Elena, making sure I wasn't completely alone in the world. The thought that someone was checking on me, someone who understood what I was facing, made my chest tight with gratitude. That night, I wrote another letter to Grandma Elena, telling her about the honors program, about Captain Reynolds's mentorship, about the possibility of submarine service. I told her about Maria's visit, about learning the truth of her courage, about carrying her bronze star like a talisman. "I'm becoming the officer you always knew I could be," I wrote, "and I'm doing it not despite our family's opposition, but because of the example you set. You showed me that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you fight alone." I folded the letter and placed it with the others I'd written to her since her death. Someday, when I graduated, when I earned my commission, when I proved that choosing myself over their expectations had been the right decision, I would visit her grave and read them all aloud. But for now, it was enough to know that I was becoming exactly who she'd believed I could be, carrying forward a legacy of service that no one could take away from me. The submarine service application consumed my winter break. While other midshipmen went home for the holidays, I remained at the academy, one of a handful of students who either couldn't or chose not to return to their families. The empty halls of Bancroft Hall echoed with my footsteps as I worked on the most important essay of my life. The prompt was deceptively simple. Describe a leadership challenge you have overcome and explain how it prepared you for submarine service. Most applicants would probably write about sports teams or student organizations, safe examples that demonstrated competence without revealing vulnerability. But Captain Reynolds's words echoed in my mind. The Navy needs officers who understand that true leadership sometimes means standing alone. I wrote about the choice to attend the academy despite my family's opposition, about learning to lead from a position of isolation rather than support. I wrote about Grandma Elena's hidden service, about discovering that courage often runs deepest in those who never speak of it. Most importantly, I wrote about understanding that submarine service required the same qualities that had carried me through my first year at the academy: the ability to function effectively when cut off from external validation, when the only approval that mattered was your own professional competence. The essay went through 7 drafts before I was satisfied. Each revision stripped away more defensiveness, more justification, until what remained was simply the truth. I had learned to lead myself before trying to lead others, and that foundation would serve me well in the isolated, high-pressure environment of submarine operations. Professor Martinez reviewed the final draft during one of our mentorship sessions in January. He read in silence while I sat across from his desk, trying not to fidget with my cover or second-guess every word choice. "This is powerful work, Mitchell," he said finally. "You've managed to turn what many would see as a disadvantage, lack of family support, into evidence of exceptional resilience and self-reliance." "Thank you, sir." "There's one section I want to discuss, though. You write here about leading from isolation. Can you elaborate on what that means to you?" I'd been hoping he would ask that question. It was the concept that had crystallized for me during the writing process, the understanding that had emerged from months of reflection on my experience. In most leadership models, sir, the leader derives authority from position, from followers, from institutional support. But submarine commanders often have to make decisions with incomplete information, cut off from higher command, responsible for the lives of their crew in situations where no one else can help them. I paused, organizing my thoughts. My experience has taught me that the most reliable form of leadership comes from internal conviction rather than external validation. When you've learned to trust your own judgment, despite opposition from people whose opinions you value, you're prepared to make hard decisions even when everyone around you thinks you're wrong. Professor Martinez nodded slowly. "And you believe this applies to submarine service specifically?" "Yes, sir. A submarine captain 20,000 leagues under the sea can't call home for advice. They can't rely on popular opinion or family approval. They have to know, absolutely and without doubt, that their decisions are based on competence, training, and sound judgment, rather than the need to please others." Interesting perspective. Most applicants focus on teamwork and collaborative leadership. Teamwork is essential, sir, but it has to be built on a foundation of individual strength. You can't lead others effectively if you're still looking for someone else to tell you who you're supposed to be. The acceptance letter for submarine service arrived on a Thursday in March, delivered during morning formation by Midshipman Rodriguez, who'd become something of a mentor since our confrontation the previous summer. He handed me the envelope with a slight smile that suggested he already knew what it contained. "Congratulations, Mitchell," he said quietly. "Submarine service is the most demanding track in the Navy. You've earned something significant here." Inside the envelope was not just an acceptance letter, but assignment orders for my summer internship, USS Virginia, a nuclear-powered attack submarine based out of Norfolk. I would spend 6 weeks observing submarine operations, participating in training exercises, and working directly with the crew and command staff. Jessica screamed when I told her, loud enough to bring our entire hall running to see what had happened. Within minutes, news had spread through our company that Sarah Mitchell had been accepted for submarine service, only the third woman in our class to receive such an assignment. The attention was overwhelming and unexpected. Suddenly, classmates who'd barely spoken to me were asking about the application process, about my career plans, about what it felt like to break barriers. But the most meaningful congratulations came from an unexpected source. Captain Reynolds found me in the library that evening studying submarine technical manuals I'd checked out from the restricted collection. "I see you're already preparing for your summer assignment," he observed, settling into the chair across from mine. "Yes, sir. I want to be ready for whatever they throw at me." "Good, but I have something else to discuss with you. I've been in contact with Commander Sarah Chen, the executive officer of the USS Virginia. She specifically requested you for her summer intern program." I looked up from my manual, surprised. "She requested me specifically, sir?" "Commander Chen read your submarine service application essay. She was impressed by your perspective on leadership under isolation. She thinks you might have insights that would benefit her crew." The implications of this were staggering. I wasn't just being assigned to a submarine for routine observation. I was being brought in as someone who might actually contribute to their operations, someone whose unique background might offer value to seasoned submarine professionals. "Sir, I'm honored, but I'm just a second-year midshipman. What could I possibly offer to an operational submarine crew?" Captain Reynolds smiled. "You'd be surprised what fresh perspective can bring to established operations. Commander Chen has been dealing with crew morale issues related to extended deployments, to the psychological challenges of submarine service. She thinks someone who's learned to thrive in isolation might have useful observations." That night, I called Maria Rodriguez from the payphone in Bancroft Hall. It was the first time I'd spoken to her since her visit, but I'd been carrying her number in my wallet like a lifeline to the part of my family that actually understood who I was becoming. "Sarah," her voice was warm with genuine pleasure. "How are you doing, sweetheart? How's the academy treating you?" "Better than I expected," I replied. "Maria, I got accepted for submarine service. I'm going to be interning on the USS Virginia this summer." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd been disconnected. Finally, she spoke, and I could hear tears in her voice. "Elena would be so proud," she whispered, "so incredibly proud. Submarines, Sarah, that's the most elite service in the Navy. I keep thinking about what she would say if she were here. I know exactly what she would say. She'd tell you that you're carrying forward something that started long before you were born, something that your parents tried to bury but couldn't destroy. She'd tell you that every door you open makes it easier for the women who come after you." We talked for 20 more minutes about my studies, about the challenges and opportunities ahead, about the ways my path was echoing Elena's journey in Korea. When I finally hung up, I felt more connected to my family's true legacy than I had since Grandma Elena's death. The spring semester flew by in a blur of advanced coursework, submarine technical training, and preparation for my summer internship. I studied reactor operations, weapons systems, navigation protocols, and the complex psychology of submarine crews, who spend months underwater in confined spaces. But the most important preparation came from an unexpected source. In April, Commander Chen herself visited the academy for a recruiting presentation, and she specifically requested to meet with the midshipmen, who would be interning on her submarine. She was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 5'4", with graying hair and the kind of calm intensity that spoke of years commanding in high-pressure situations. When she looked at you, you felt like she could see straight through to your core competencies and weaknesses. "Midshipman Mitchell," she said when we were introduced after her presentation, "I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your essay on leadership under isolation was remarkable. It showed understanding of submarine psychology that usually takes years of service to develop." "Thank you, ma'am. I'm honored to be selected for your program." "Tell me something, Mitchell. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing submarine crews today?" The question was clearly a test, and I took a moment to consider my answer carefully. "I think it's maintaining individual identity while functioning as part of an extremely close-knit unit, ma'am. Submarine crews have to work together more intimately than almost any other military organization, but they also have to be psychologically strong enough to handle isolation from the outside world. That balance between connection and independence is incredibly difficult to achieve." Commander Chen nodded slowly. "Interesting answer. Most people focus on technical challenges or operational complexity. You're thinking about the human element. The human element is what makes or breaks submarine operations, ma'am. The technology is only as good as the people operating it." "Exactly. That's why I requested you specifically for this internship. I want you to observe our crew dynamics, our leadership structures, our methods for maintaining morale during extended operations. I want you to tell me what you see that we might be missing." As I walked back to Bancroft Hall that evening, I realized that my summer internship wasn't just going to be about learning submarine operations. It was going to be about contributing to them. Commander Chen was bringing me aboard not just as a student, but as someone whose unique perspective might actually improve their effectiveness. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same qualities that had made my family reject me, my independence, my refusal to conform, my ability to function without external approval, were exactly what the submarine service valued most. I was finally in a place where being different wasn't a liability but an asset. That night, I wrote another letter to Grandma Elena, telling her about Commander Chen, about the opportunity to contribute rather than just observe, about the way my path was leading me toward exactly the kind of service she would have understood. "I'm learning that the things that make us different are often the things that make us valuable," I wrote. "You taught me that by hiding your own service, by showing me how courage can be invisible to people who aren't looking for it. Now I get to take everything you taught me and use it to serve something bigger than myself." The USS Virginia was a masterpiece of engineering that looked like a sleeping leviathan when I first saw her at Norfolk Naval Station in early June. 357 feet of matte black steel, designed to slip through the ocean's depths undetected and strike with surgical precision. Standing on the pier beside Commander Chen, I felt the weight of decades of naval tradition and technological advancement. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Commander Chen said, following my gaze along the submarine's sleek hull. "Nuclear-powered, Virginia-class attack submarine. She can stay underwater for months, dive deeper than most ships are long, and move through the ocean faster than you'd believe possible." The crew was already preparing for our 2-week patrol, loading supplies and conducting final systems checks. I watched men and women move with practiced efficiency, each knowing their role in the complex ballet of submarine operations. What struck me most was the quiet confidence in their movements. No wasted motion, no unnecessary conversation, just professional competence, honed by countless hours of training. "Come on," Commander Chen said. "Time to introduce you to your new home." Descending through the submarine's hatch was like entering another world. The corridors were narrow, lined with pipes and control panels, every surface serving multiple functions. The air smelled of metal and electronics, with an underlying current of the recycled atmosphere that would sustain us during our underwater deployment. Commander Chen led me through a quick orientation, showing me the control room, sonar station, weapons compartment, and crew quarters. Everything was compact, efficient, designed for maximum functionality in minimum space. "You'll be bunking in the junior officers' quarters," she explained, opening a door to reveal a space barely larger than a closet, containing 2 narrow racks, a small desk, and storage lockers. "Your roommate is Lieutenant Sarah Kim, our navigation officer. She's been briefed on your project." Lieutenant Kim turned out to be a quiet, intense woman about 5 years older than me, with the kind of focused energy that came from years of precise technical work. She welcomed me aboard with professional courtesy but obvious curiosity about what a midshipman was doing on an operational patrol. "Commander Chen says you're here to observe crew dynamics," she said as I stowed my gear in the tiny locker space. "That's unusual. Most Academy interns focus on technical systems. I'm interested in how submarine crews maintain effectiveness during extended isolation," I replied. "How you handle the psychological challenges of operating in a confined space, cut off from outside contact." Lieutenant Kim nodded thoughtfully. "That's actually a really important question. We spend months underwater, sometimes unable to communicate with home, dealing with stress and monotony, and the constant awareness that we're operating in an environment that can kill us if we make mistakes." Over the next few days, as we prepared for departure, I began to understand the unique culture of submarine service. These sailors had to trust each other completely. Their lives literally depended on every crew member performing their duties flawlessly. But they also had to maintain individual psychological strength, because there was nowhere to hide, no privacy, no escape from the pressures of underwater operations. I spent time in different sections of the boat, observing how the crew interacted, how they handled stress, how they maintained morale during the endless routines of submarine patrol. What I discovered was a leadership structure unlike anything I'd studied at the Academy. Traditional military hierarchy existed, of course, but it was supplemented by an informal network of mutual support that crossed rank boundaries. Senior enlisted personnel mentored junior officers. Officers worked alongside sailors in ways that would be unusual on surface ships. Everyone understood that their survival depended not just on following orders, but on thinking independently and supporting their shipmates. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, no relation to my Academy tormentor, became my unofficial guide to submarine culture. He was a 20-year veteran of the submarine service, a nuclear technician who understood Virginia's reactor systems better than anyone else aboard. "You want to understand submarine psychology?" he said during one of our conversations in the engine room. "It's simple. We're all volunteers here. Nobody gets assigned to submarine duty against their will. We choose this life because we want the challenge, the responsibility, the chance to be part of something elite." "But what about the isolation?" I asked. "How do you handle months underwater without contact with family?" Chief Rodriguez smiled. "That's where most people misunderstand submarine service. We're not isolated from people. We're just isolated from the outside world. The crew becomes your family. You learn to depend on each other in ways most people never experience." He was right. Over the first week of our patrol, I watched the crew develop rhythms and relationships that went far beyond professional cooperation. They looked out for each other's physical and mental health, shared personal stories and concerns, created traditions and rituals that built unit cohesion. But I also noticed something else: the way individual strength contributed to group effectiveness. The sailors who thrived in submarine service weren't just team players. They were people who could function independently when necessary, who could make decisions under pressure without waiting for guidance from higher authority. It reminded me of my own experience at the Academy, learning to find strength within myself when external support wasn't available. The submarine crew operated on a similar principle. They drew strength from their bonds with each other, but they also maintained the individual resilience necessary to function in extreme conditions. Commander Chen invited me to observe a complex training exercise during our second week at sea. The scenario involved simulated equipment failures that required the crew to adapt their procedures on the fly, working together to solve problems that hadn't been covered in their standard training. "This is where we test real leadership," she explained as we watched from the control room. "When everything goes wrong simultaneously, when standard procedures don't apply, that's when you find out who can think independently and who's just following scripts." The exercise was intense, with multiple systems failing in cascade, forcing the crew to improvise solutions while maintaining submarine safety and mission capability. I watched officers and enlisted personnel work together, sharing ideas, challenging assumptions, adapting to changing conditions with remarkable flexibility. What struck me most was how the best performers combined strong individual judgment with seamless teamwork. They didn't wait for permission to suggest solutions. but they also didn't act independently without considering the impact on their shipmates. It was exactly the kind of leadership balance I'd been trying to understand in my academy coursework. After the exercise, Commander Chen asked for my observations. We met in the wardroom, a small space that served as the officers' dining area and conference room. "What did you see out there?" she asked, settling into her chair with a cup of coffee that had probably been brewing for hours. "I saw leadership that operates from multiple levels simultaneously," I replied. "Not just top-down command authority, but lateral leadership, where crew members take initiative based on their expertise and the immediate situation." Elaborate. In that exercise, Senior Chief Martinez didn't wait for orders when he saw the reactor coolant issue. He took immediate action based on his technical knowledge, then informed the command structure. Lieutenant Torres challenged the initial damage assessment when her sonar readings didn't match the simulated parameters. Everyone was thinking independently while still coordinating their actions. Commander Chen nodded. "And what does that tell you about submarine leadership?" "That it requires people who can function effectively without constant supervision or approval. People who've learned to trust their own judgment while remaining responsive to changing circumstances and team needs." Exactly. We can't have crew members who freeze up when they can't ask permission. We also can't have loose cannons who ignore the chain of command. We need people who understand when to act independently and when to follow orders, who can balance individual initiative with group cohesion. She paused, studying me with the same intensity I'd noticed during our first meeting. "Your academy essay mentioned learning to lead from isolation. Can you see how that applies to submarine service?" I thought about my experience with my family, about learning to trust my own judgment when everyone around me thought I was making a mistake. I thought about the months of cold silence, the funeral I was banned from attending, the slow process of building confidence that didn't depend on external approval. Yes, ma'am, submarine service requires the same kind of inner strength that comes from learning to stand alone when necessary. But it also requires the ability to channel that strength into effective teamwork when you're part of a crew. Which brings me to why I specifically requested you for this internship, Commander Chen said. "I've been watching your interactions with the crew, your observations about our operations, your questions about leadership and psychology. You have insights that could benefit our training programs." She pulled a folder from her briefcase and slid it across the table to me. "I'm recommending you for early selection to the submarine officer program. Instead of waiting until after graduation, you could begin specialized training next summer, commission directly into submarine service, and fast-track to your own command." I stared at the folder, hardly believing what I was hearing. Early selection was almost unheard of, reserved for the most exceptional candidates who demonstrated not just competence but genuine potential for innovation in submarine operations. "Ma'am, I'm honored, but—" "Think about it," she interrupted gently. "You've found your calling, Mitchell. Your background, your perspective, your ability to function independently while building strong team relationships. It's exactly what the submarine force needs for the challenges we're facing." That night, lying in my narrow rack while Lieutenant Kim slept quietly across the tiny compartment, I thought about the path that had brought me to this moment. From the family dinner where I'd been called a failure to this submarine patrol, where I was being offered early advancement in the Navy's most elite service. The irony was profound. Everything my family had feared about my military service, the independence, the willingness to challenge conventional thinking, the refusal to be limited by their expectations, had become exactly the qualities that made me valuable to the submarine community. I was becoming exactly who Grandma Elena had always believed I could be, and I was doing it in an environment where being different wasn't just accepted, but actively sought after. The years following my submarine internship passed with the relentless momentum of military life. I accepted Commander Chen's early selection recommendation and spent my remaining academy years in an accelerated track that prepared me for immediate submarine duty upon graduation. While my classmates wrestled with uncertainty about their post-graduation assignments, I had crystal-clear direction and purpose. Graduation day arrived under a cloudless May sky at Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium. 2,400 midshipmen in dress whites, families filling the stands with cameras and proud tears, and the Blue Angels thundering overhead in perfect formation. I sat in the front section reserved for distinguished graduates, wearing the gold stars that marked my honors program completion and submarine service designation. Looking up into the stands, I could see families embracing their newly commissioned officers, multi-generational celebrations of military service and personal achievement. For a moment, the absence of my own family felt like a physical ache. But then I spotted Maria Rodriguez in the crowd, wearing a navy blue dress and holding a small American flag. She'd driven 6 hours from Richmond to watch me graduate, representing not just herself but the memory of Grandma Elena and the legacy of Catherine's hidden service. After the ceremony, as newly minted ensigns celebrated with their loved ones, Maria found me near the monument to naval aviation. She moved with the careful dignity of someone carrying profound emotion, and when she reached me, she pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home. "Elena is here with us," she whispered against my ear. "She's so proud, Sarah, so incredibly proud of everything you've become." She stepped back and reached into her purse, pulling out a small wrapped package. "I saved this for today. Elena asked me to give it to you when you graduated." Inside the package was a photograph I'd never seen before. Grandma Elena in her Navy uniform, standing beside what looked like a field hospital in Korea. On the back, in her familiar handwriting, were the words, "For my warrior granddaughter, the uniform suits you. Love always, Grandma Elena." But there was something else in the package. A letter addressed to me in Elena's handwriting with "To be opened on graduation day" written across the envelope. "She wrote this the week before she died," Maria explained. "She wanted you to have it when you became an officer." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, you've done something remarkable. You've become the officer I always knew you could be, despite every obstacle placed in your path. I wish I could be there to see you in your uniform, to salute you as a fellow veteran, to tell you how proud I am of your courage. You chose a difficult path, sweetheart. You chose service over safety, principles over popularity, your own truth over other people's comfort. That kind of courage is rare in any generation, and precious beyond measure. I want you to know that watching you grow into your strength has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. In you, I see the best of Catherine's legacy, the best of my own service, and something entirely new, a young woman who refuses to be limited by anyone else's vision of what she should become. The Navy is lucky to have you. Your future sailors are lucky to have you. And someday, when you have your own command, when you're responsible for other people's lives and careers, remember that the best leaders are those who've learned to trust themselves completely while never forgetting their responsibility to others. I love you beyond words, and I believe in you beyond measure. Your proud grandmother, Elena." I read the letter twice before I could see clearly enough to look up at Maria, who was watching me with tears streaming down her cheeks. "She never stopped believing in you," Maria said softly. "Even when the rest of the family turned their backs, even when she was dying, she knew you were destined for something extraordinary." That evening at the graduation reception, I was approached by Captain Reynolds, who was retiring after 30 years of service. He looked distinguished in his dress blues, his chest decorated with ribbons that told the story of a distinguished naval career. "Congratulations, Ensign Mitchell," he said, offering his hand. "I hear you're reporting to submarine school next month." "Yes, sir. New London, Connecticut. 6 months of nuclear power training, then assignment to my first boat." "Outstanding. You know, I've been following your progress since that presentation about Korean War medical units. You've developed into exactly the kind of officer the Navy needs. Someone who understands that leadership isn't about authority, it's about responsibility." He paused, studying me with the same intensity I remembered from our early conversations. "I have one piece of advice for you as you begin your career. Never forget that the qualities that made your family uncomfortable are the same qualities that will make you an exceptional naval officer. Your independence, your willingness to think differently, your ability to stand alone when necessary, those aren't character flaws to be corrected. They're strengths to be cultivated." 6 months later, I graduated from submarine school at the top of my class and received orders to the USS Connecticut, a Los Angeles-class attack submarine based in Pearl Harbor. My first assignment was as the boat's assistant navigator, responsible for helping chart our course through some of the most strategically important waters in the Pacific. The Connecticut's commanding officer was Commander James Sullivan, a veteran submariner with 20 years of experience and a reputation for developing exceptional junior officers. During my first week aboard, he called me to his stateroom for what he termed a getting-to-know-you conversation. "Ensign Mitchell," he said, gesturing for me to take a seat across from his small desk, "I've read your academy records, your submarine school evaluations, and Commander Chen's recommendation. Impressive background." "Thank you, sir. I'm particularly interested in your research on submarine crew psychology. We're going to be deploying for 6 months in the South China Sea, operating in some challenging conditions. I want you to observe our crew dynamics and provide recommendations for maintaining morale and effectiveness during extended operations." It was exactly the kind of assignment I'd hoped for, not just technical navigation duties, but the opportunity to contribute to the human side of submarine operations. Over the following months, as we patrolled the strategic waterways of the Western Pacific, I studied how our crew adapted to the stresses of underwater deployment. What I discovered reinforced everything I'd learned during my academy internship. The most effective submarine sailors were those who combined strong individual resilience with genuine commitment to their shipmates. They could function independently when necessary, but they also understood that their survival and success depended on the strength of their team. I implemented several programs to support crew morale: informal mentorship pairings between senior and junior sailors, rotating educational sessions where crew members shared expertise from their specialties, and what I called perspective breaks, brief sessions where sailors could discuss challenges and solutions in a non-hierarchical environment. The programs were successful enough that Commander Sullivan recommended them for implementation across the submarine fleet. More importantly, they caught the attention of the Pacific Fleet's Submarine Command, who were always looking for innovative approaches to the unique challenges of underwater operations. 3 years into my submarine career, I received a call that would change everything. I was in my stateroom aboard the Connecticut, reviewing navigation charts for our upcoming patrol, when the ship's communication officer knocked on my door. "Ma'am, you have a priority call from Pacific Fleet headquarters. They're patching it through to the wardroom." The caller was Captain Michael Torres, the Pacific Fleet Submarine Operations Officer, and his news was both unexpected and career-defining. "Ensign Mitchell, we've been following your work on crew psychology and morale programs. Your innovations have been implemented across 3 submarine squadrons, with remarkable results. We'd like to offer you early promotion to lieutenant junior grade and assignment as executive officer aboard the USS Hampton." Executive officer. Second in command of an entire submarine. It was a position typically reserved for officers with at least 5 years of experience, and I was being offered it after only 3 years of service. "Sir, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I have the experience level typically required for an XO position." "Experience comes in different forms, Mitchell. You've demonstrated exceptional leadership ability, innovative thinking, and the kind of psychological insight that's crucial for submarine operations. Hampton's commanding officer specifically requested you based on your reputation." Hampton was homeported in Norfolk, which meant returning to the East Coast, closer to the family that had rejected me but also closer to Maria and the memories of Grandma Elena. It also meant increased responsibility, greater challenges, and the opportunity to shape submarine operations at a level I'd never imagined reaching so early in my career. "I accept the assignment, sir." "Excellent. You'll report to Norfolk in 6 weeks for transition briefings. Congratulations, Lieutenant Mitchell. You're about to take a significant step toward your own command." That night, I sat in my stateroom looking at the framed photograph of Grandma Elena in her Navy uniform, thinking about the journey that had brought me from family disappointment to submarine leadership. Every rejection, every moment of isolation, every choice to trust my own judgment over others' expectations had been preparation for this moment. I was 25 years old, about to become the executive officer of a nuclear-powered attack submarine, responsible for the lives and careers of more than 100 sailors. And I was ready for the challenge not despite the family that had rejected me, but because I'd learned to build strength from within, rather than seeking approval from without. The girl who'd been banned from her grandmother's funeral was becoming the woman her grandmother had always known she could be. 5 years passed in the challenging waters of submarine command. I served as executive officer aboard the USS Hampton for 2 years, learning the intricate balance between technical expertise and human leadership that submarine operations demanded. My innovations in crew psychology became standard practice across the Atlantic Fleet, and my reputation for developing junior officers caught the attention of senior Navy leadership. At 27, I was selected for my own command, the USS Albany, a Virginia-class attack submarine that represented the cutting edge of naval technology. The ceremony was held at Naval Submarine Base New London, with Admiral Patricia Williams, the first female submarine force commander, presiding over the change of command. "Commander Mitchell," Admiral Williams said as she transferred the ceremonial key to me, "you represent the future of submarine warfare. Officers who understand that our most sophisticated weapon systems are only as effective as the sailors who operate them." Standing on the pier that day, wearing the 4 gold stripes of a Navy commander and accepting responsibility for one of the most advanced submarines in the world, I thought about the path that had brought me to this moment. From the girl who'd been called a family failure to the woman taking command of a nuclear-powered attack submarine, the transformation seemed almost impossible to believe. But command brought new challenges. The Albany was scheduled for a 6-month deployment to the Mediterranean, conducting intelligence operations in some of the most strategically sensitive waters in the world. My crew of 135 sailors would be depending on my leadership to keep them safe while accomplishing missions that could affect global security. During our pre-deployment training, I implemented the crew development programs I'd refined over years of submarine service. But I also added something new, what I called resilience circles, small groups where sailors could discuss the psychological challenges of extended underwater operations without fear of judgment or career impact. Chief Petty Officer Angela Martinez, my senior enlisted advisor, was initially skeptical of the program. She was a 20-year submarine veteran who'd served under some of the Navy's most demanding commanders, and she wasn't sure that encouraging sailors to discuss their feelings was compatible with military discipline. "Ma'am," she said during one of our weekly meetings, "some of the senior crew are concerned that these discussion groups might undermine military bearing. They're worried about sailors sharing doubts or fears that could affect operational security." "Chief, what's more dangerous to operational security? Sailors who acknowledge and address their psychological challenges, or sailors who suppress those challenges until they affect their performance?" She considered this for a moment. "When you put it that way, ma'am, I see your point. But how do we maintain the line between healthy discussion and undermining confidence in command decisions?" "By modeling the behavior we want to see. By showing the crew that acknowledging psychological challenges is a sign of strength, not weakness. By creating an environment where people feel safe to seek help before problems become crises." The resilience circles proved their value during our Mediterranean deployment. 3 months into our patrol, we received orders for an extended surveillance mission that required us to remain submerged and silent for 30 days, maintaining position near a strategically important shipping lane while gathering intelligence on foreign naval activities. 30 days underwater without surfacing was the kind of mission that tested every aspect of submarine operations: technical systems, crew endurance, and psychological resilience. The air recycling systems would be pushed to their limits. Food storage would require careful management. Most importantly, the crew would have to maintain peak performance while dealing with the stress of extended isolation. By day 15, the psychological pressure was becoming evident. Sailors were more irritable, conflicts between crew members were increasing, and I could see the signs of stress that typically preceded more serious morale problems. This was where the resilient circles proved their value. Instead of pretending everything was normal, we acknowledged that the mission was challenging and created spaces for sailors to discuss their experiences. Senior petty officers shared stories of previous long deployments. Junior sailors talked about techniques they'd developed for managing claustrophobia, and officers demonstrated that acknowledging difficulty wasn't the same as admitting defeat. Lieutenant Sarah Park, my navigation officer, approached me on day 20 with a concern that illustrated the value of our approach. "Captain, Petty Officer Chen has been struggling with anxiety about his family situation. His wife is pregnant with their first child, and he's worried about missing the birth. Normally, he might try to hide this concern, but because of the resilience circles, he felt comfortable discussing it with his group." "What kind of support does he need?" "Just acknowledge that his feelings are normal, and some practical strategies for managing the worry. His group helped him understand that focusing on what he can control, doing his job excellently so we can complete the mission and return home safely, is more productive than worrying about things he can't influence. This was exactly the kind of situation where traditional military culture might have expected a sailor to suffer in silence, potentially affecting his performance and the crew's effectiveness. Instead, we'd created an environment where seeking support was viewed as responsible behavior rather than weakness. The mission was completed successfully, with intelligence gathered that would prove crucial for future naval operations in the region. More importantly, we demonstrated that acknowledging psychological challenges didn't undermine military effectiveness. It enhanced it. When we returned to port, Admiral Williams requested a personal debrief on our deployment. We met in her office at Submarine Force Atlantic Headquarters, overlooking the James River, where countless submarines had departed for missions around the world. "Commander Mitchell," she said, reviewing the mission reports spread across her desk, "your deployment results were exceptional. Intelligence value beyond expectations, crew performance ratings through the roof, and 0 psychological casualties during a 30-day submerged patrol. How did you accomplish this?" "By treating psychological resilience as seriously as we treat technical competence, Admiral. We acknowledge that submarine service places unique demands on sailors and created systems to support their mental health proactively rather than reactively. Your approach challenges some traditional assumptions about military culture. Have you encountered resistance from senior leadership?" "Some, Admiral. There are officers who believe that acknowledging psychological challenges is incompatible with military discipline. But the results speak for themselves. Crews that receive psychological support perform better, not worse." Admiral Williams nodded slowly. "The Navy is changing, Commander. We're recognizing that our people are our most valuable asset, and we need to take care of them as carefully as we maintain our equipment. I'm recommending your resilience programs for implementation across the entire submarine force." That evening, I called Maria Rodriguez from my quarters in Albany. It had become our tradition to speak after significant career milestones, a way of maintaining connection to the family legacy that my parents had tried to erase. "Admiral Williams wants to implement my programs across the entire submarine force," I told her, unable to keep the excitement out of my voice. "Elena would be over the moon," Maria replied, and I could hear the pride in her voice. "You know, I think she always knew you'd do something like this, not just succeed in the military, but change how the military operates. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if she'd been able to share her stories with me when I was growing up, if my parents hadn't been so afraid of her influence." "You might have had an easier path," Maria said thoughtfully, "but I'm not sure you would have developed the same strength. Elena used to say that some people need to be tested by fire to discover what they're truly capable of. Maybe your family's rejection was part of what prepared you to challenge traditional thinking." It was an interesting perspective. The idea that the very experiences that had caused me pain might have been essential to developing the qualities that made me effective as a leader. The isolation I'd experienced had taught me to trust my own judgment. The rejection had forced me to build internal strength rather than depending on external approval. 6 months later, I received a call that would bring my journey full circle. I was in my stateroom reviewing personnel evaluations when my phone rang with a call from an unfamiliar Virginia number. "Commander Mitchell? This is Rebecca Chen from Arlington National Cemetery. I'm calling about your grandmother, Elena Mitchell. We've been contacted by a family member requesting information about burial arrangements." My blood went cold. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. My grandmother was buried in Richmond 3 years ago." "Ma'am, according to our records, Elena Rodriguez Mitchell was entitled to burial at Arlington National Cemetery, based on her service record in Korea. Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, and campaign ribbons for Korean service. No one claimed those burial rights when she died." Elena Rodriguez Mitchell. She'd legally kept both names, her maiden name that honored her military service, and her married name that connected her to the family that had hidden that service. "Who requested the information?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Marcus Mitchell. He identified himself as her grandson and said the family was interested in having her remains transferred to Arlington with full military honors." Marcus. "My brother, who'd mocked my military ambitions and supported my parents' decision to ban me from the funeral. Now, 3 years later, he was trying to claim the military honors for Grandma Elena that the family had been ashamed of when she was alive. "Ma'am," I said carefully, "I'm Elena Rodriguez Mitchell's granddaughter and her closest living military relative. I'd like to discuss the proper procedures for arranging her burial at Arlington." "Of course, Commander. Given your rank and your grandmother's service record, you would be the appropriate family representative for the arrangements. Can you come to Arlington to discuss the details?" 2 weeks later, I stood in the offices of Arlington National Cemetery, wearing my dress blue uniform and carrying copies of both Grandma Elena's military records and the Bronze Star that Maria had given me. The irony was profound. I was finally able to honor my grandmother's service, but only because I'd achieved the military rank that gave me the authority to do so. The cemetery official, Mr. Patterson, reviewed the documents with the careful attention that such matters deserved. "Your grandmother's service record is remarkable, Commander. Korean War veterans, especially those who served in medical units near the front lines, demonstrated exceptional courage. She's absolutely entitled to burial here with full military honors." "What does that process involve?" "Transfer of remains, military funeral service, burial in Section 60 where we honor recent conflicts. As her military representative, you would coordinate with other family members about the arrangements." I thought about my parents, who'd hidden Elena's service for decades. I thought about Marcus, who was apparently ready to claim military honors now that they carried prestige rather than shame. I thought about Vanessa, who had never understood why I'd chosen military service over safer alternatives. Most of all, I thought about Grandma Elena herself, who'd carried her Bronze Star in secret for 60 years, who'd encouraged my military dreams while hiding her own military achievements, who'd died believing that her service meant something even if her family refused to acknowledge it. "Mr. Patterson," I said, "I'd like to arrange the service as soon as possible, and I'd like to ensure that the ceremony properly honors both her Korean War service and her legacy as someone who encouraged other women to serve." "Absolutely, Commander. We'll make sure she receives the honor she's earned." As I left Arlington that day, I realized that my journey was coming full circle in ways I'd never anticipated. The girl who'd been banned from her grandmother's funeral was now arranging a military ceremony that would finally honor Elena's service. The family that had rejected my military ambitions would now have to confront the reality that their mother and grandmother had been a decorated combat veteran. Most importantly, I would finally be able to give Grandma Elena the recognition she deserved, not as the quiet homemaker my family had preferred, but as the warrior she'd always been. The funeral at Arlington National Cemetery was scheduled for a crisp October morning. I arrived early, standing beside the gravesite in my dress blues, watching the honor guard prepare for the ceremony. The American flag draped over Grandma Elena's casket snapped in the autumn breeze, and I could see my family gathering near the entrance. Mom, Dad, Marcus, and Vanessa, all looking uncomfortable in their formal clothes. They hadn't spoken to me in 8 years, not since the day they'd banned me from her original funeral. Now they were here because Marcus had called Arlington, trying to claim military honors he'd never understood or respected. As the ceremony began, 8 Navy SEALs in dress uniforms took their positions. The honor guard presented arms. The chaplain spoke about service and sacrifice. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for, the flag-folding ceremony. When it was finished, the lead petty officer approached me, snapped to attention, and presented the flag. "On behalf of a grateful nation," he said, his voice carrying across the cemetery, "this flag is presented in honor of your grandmother's faithful service to her country." Behind him, the 8 SEALs rendered a crisp salute. "Colonel, ma'am," the senior chief said clearly. My family's faces went white. "Colonel." They'd never known about my promotion, never realized that the family failure now outranked most officers in the military. I accepted the flag and turned toward them. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "the people you cast aside become exactly who they were meant to be." As we walked away from the grave, I finally understood what Grandma Elena had always known, that some stories end not with revenge, but with honor. What moments in your life have shaped who you've become? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring journeys of transformation and resilience.